The first sensation is in sight. Acrid cocktail of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, animal waste, and something vaguely like rotting vegetables fills your lungs. The second sensation is the feeling. It's a sack stuffed with damp, lumpy straw that's been compressed by bodies for months, teeming with a universe of mites, lice, and fleas that have been feasting on you all night. A chicken, its eyes like black beads, pecks at something on the dirt floor a few feet from your face. You haven't woken up in some trendy, rustic Airbnb. You've been transported to the year 1324. There is no phone. There is no toilet. There is no privacy. There is no toothpaste. You are 23 years old, and your joints already feel ancient. Your back pops and cracks like a bundle of dry twigs, a daily reminder that you are, by the standards of your time, essentially middle-aged. Mysterious stew that looks and smells like it was filtered through someone's foot. Still romanticizing the good old days. You wouldn't last till lunch. Hollywood gave us shining knights, noble kings, and sweeping orchestral music over misty castles. Reality gave you dysentery, bubonic plague, and a 1 in 2 chance your own children wouldn't survive past their 3rd birthday. This isn't Game of Thrones. This is game of try not to die before sunset. We are going on the ultimate journey through time. We will strip away the fantasy and confront the brutal, filthy, and terrifying reality of the past to understand the almost unbelievable chain of events that had to happen for our modern world to even exist. Or at least try to. Let's begin where every day begins. In our world, it's a gentle transition. In 1324, an assault on the senses. You are jolted awake not by birdsong or a gentle alarm, but by the furious, clanging summons of the local church bell. It's not a pleasant chime. It is an iron command, reminding you that your time belongs not to you, but to God and your Lord. Your eyes struggle to adjust in the gloom. The only light filters through a small, shuttered opening in the wall, and the smoke hole in the thatched roof directly above the central fire pit. There is no chimney. The smoke from last night's fire and this morning's has coated every surface, and inside of your lungs, with a fine layer of soot. The hut is a single room, perhaps 10 by 12 feet, constructed from wattle and daub, a lattice of sticks packed with mud, dung, and straw. It's a structure you share with your entire family, parents, siblings, and maybe a grandparent who coughs wetly in the corner. You also share it with your most valuable livestock. The goats, the chickens, perhaps even a pig, are all in here with you. Their body heat a vital source of warmth in winter, inescapable presence. You push aside the single, heavy wool blanket you share with 2 of your siblings, greasy with lanolin and accumulated filth and perpetually damp. Washing it is a monumental, once-a-year task involving lye made from wood ash that would burn your skin, and days of drying that you can't afford. The blanket is a walking ecosystem for the fleas that now jump from it to you. A shooting pain sears through your lower back. Stoop labor of the fields has already begun to permanently curve your spine. Your knees and knuckles ache with what we now call arthritis, a condition you simply know as the aches. You are likely suffering from chronic malnutrition. Your diet of coarse bread and watery vegetable stew means vitamin deficiencies are rampant. Your gums might bleed from scurvy. Your bones might be soft from rickets. These aren't diseases you diagnose. They are simply the state of being alive. Legs over the side of the straw pallet, and your bare feet land on the cold, you don't want to know what from. The air is thick with the sounds of life. The snuffling of the pig, the coughing of your father, the whimpering of the baby. This is the symphony of your morning. There is no concept of personal space, no moment of quiet reflection. Your life is lived entirely in public, a noisy, smelly, communal existence from which there is no escape. You survive the waking moment. A pressing biological need arises. Nature calls, and in the 14th century, it screams. The modern concept of a bathroom, a private, sanitary space, is so far in the future it might as well be science fiction. Your options are grim. As a peasant, your toilet is a bucket. It sits in a corner of your one-room hut, or perhaps just outside. It is already half full from the night's use. The smell is eye-watering. Its contents are unceremoniously tossed into the street or onto the household's midden heap, a festering pile of domestic waste, food scraps, and excrement that serves as both a trash pile and a compost heap. If you live in a town, things are somehow worse. The streets themselves are the sewers. A central channel called a kennel runs down the middle of the narrow. Into this channel goes everything. Human waste tossed from overhead windows, animal dung, butcher's offal, and 1,000 other rotting, unidentifiable liquids. You are supposed to shout guard as low. French for watch out for the water. Before you empty your chamber pot from a second-story window, But in the chaotic bustle of a medieval town, this courtesy is often forgotten. Walking down the street is a perilous exercise in dodging what residents charmingly called slops, treacherous quagmire filth that oozes into the wells and streams from which you draw your drinking water. This is why diseases like cholera, typhoid, and dysentery are not rare outbreaks. Simmering background noise of urban life. You might think the nobility had it better in their grand castles. They did, but only slightly. Their solution was the garderobe, a small room with a stone or wooden plank that had a hole in it, jutting out from the side of the castle wall. It was a toilet that emptied directly down the exterior wall. While an improvement on a bucket, this turned the castle moat into a stagnant. This wasn't just disgusting. It was a military liability. Audacious attackers would sometimes brave the foul moat and attempt to climb up the latrine chute to infiltrate the castle. And the unfortunate soul with the job of cleaning these cesspits was a gong farmer, a miserable, low status, but well-paid job that could only be performed at night. As for personal hygiene, toilet paper is a fantasy. You use what is available, a handful of straw, moss leaves, or if you're very lucky, in public latrines, a gomphus stick, a stick with a sea sponge in the end, kept in a bucket of salt water or vinegar, while it existed, was a harsh lye-based substance used for laundry, not for delicate hands. The link between filth and disease is not understood. You don't wash your hands. The very concept of germs is centuries away. You've navigated the biohazards of the morning, and now it's time for breakfast. Food in the Middle Ages is not about pleasure. It's about calories. It's about consuming just enough energy to survive another day of brutal physical labor. The centerpiece of your diet is. This perpetual stew simmers for days or weeks over the central hearth. Anything and everything goes in barley, oats, peas, beans, cabbage, onions, turnips. When the pot gets low, you just add more water and whatever new scraps you have. The flavor is monotonous. Smoky, meat is a rare luxury, reserved for feast days. Spices like pepper and cloves are so astronomically expensive they're used as currency. Salt is a precious commodity, locked away by the lord of the manor. Your other staple is bread. Fluffy loaf we know, dark, heavy brick made from rye or barley. The grain is coarsely ground, stone and grit included, which wears down your teeth over time. And sometimes, the rye is infected with a fungus called ergot. When baked into bread, this fungus causes a horrifying condition called ergotism or St. Anthony's fire. It leads to vivid hallucinations, agonizing burning sensations in the limbs, convulsions, and eventually gangrene that causes your fingers, toes, and even entire limbs to mummify and fall off. You don't know it's the bread. You believe you've been cursed by God or bewitched. This precarious existence means famine. Any of these can wipe out a harvest and send your village to starvation. There is no global supply chain, no government aid. Your world is your village, and if your village has no food, your prospects are even grimmer. Medieval medicine is based on the ancient Greek theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness is believed to be caused by an imbalance of these humors. This is why bleeding is the most common medical procedure. You have too much blood. Barber surgeon will open a vein with a phlegm and drain a pint of it into a bowl. Ironically, they might still bleed you. Other treatments include induced vomiting, laxatives, and applying poultices made of ingredients like donkey dung and boiled slugs. Surgery is a terrifying last resort, performed without anesthetic or antiseptics. Likely the same barber who pulls your teeth will amputate a gangrenous limb with a saw, then cauterize the stump with a red-hot iron to stop the bleeding. The pain is unimaginable, and survival from the subsequent infection is unlikely. The greatest medical danger is childbirth. With no understanding of hygiene or obstetrics, giving birth is a life-threatening ordeal and a leading cause of death for women of childbearing age. For 1,000 years, this was the state of Europe, a world of survival, feudal obligation, and the unshakable authority of the church. But even in this dark soil, the seeds of a new world were beginning to sprout. Several forces converged to crack open the medieval mindset. In 1453, the city of Constantinople, the last remnant of the Roman Empire, fell to the Ottoman Turks. Greek scholars fled westward, bringing with them a treasure trove of ancient texts from Plato, Aristotle, and the great thinkers of antiquity, knowledge that had been lost to Western Europe for centuries. At the same time, in the burgeoning city-states of Italy, a new class of wealthy merchants and bankers was rising. Families like the Medici and Florence were accumulating vast fortunes not from land, but from trade and finance. They began to compete with each other not just in business, but in prestige, becoming lavish patrons of the arts. They funded painters, sculptors, and architects to beautify their cities and immortalize their own names. And then came the single most disruptive invention of the era. A goldsmith named Johannes Gutenberg perfected the printing press with movable type. Before Gutenberg, a book had to be painstakingly copied by hand, a process that could take a monk a year or more. Books were rare, priceless objects accessible only to the clergy and the highest nobility. The printing press changed everything. Ideas could be reproduced by the thousands. Knowledge could be disseminated across the continent with breathtaking speed. It was the internet of its day, and it would set Europe on fire. This convergence of lost knowledge, new money, and new technology ignited the Renaissance, a rebirth of art, culture, and thought. Humanity began to look not just to heaven for answers, but to the achievements of the classical past, and, most importantly, this new philosophy was called humanism. It celebrated human potential, human reason, and the human experience. It was a profound shift from seeing man as a wretched sinner waiting for the afterlife, as a creature of beauty, intellect, and infinite possibility. If one man embodied the limitless potential of the Renaissance, it was Leonardo da Vinci. To call him a painter is like calling the Amazon a river. It's true, but it misses the sheer scale of the thing. Leonardo was the ultimate Renaissance man, a polymath whose insatiable curiosity drove him to explore every facet of the natural world. He was an artist, yes, but also a scientist, an engineer, an inventor, an anatomist, a musician, and a philosopher. His notebooks, thousands of pages of sketches and mirrored script, reveal a mind constantly at work. While his contemporaries painted saints, Leonardo was designing flying machines, armored tanks, and scuba gear. He engineered complex systems of canals. He spent countless nights in secret, dissecting human corpses to understand the intricate machinery of the body, producing anatomical drawings of unparalleled accuracy that wouldn't be surpassed for centuries. He drew the fetus in the womb, the structure of the skeleton, all in an age when such work was considered blasphemous. His genius was his ability to see the connections between seemingly disparate fields. He understood that the turbulence of water was mathematically similar to the curling of hair. He applied his knowledge of anatomy to make his painted figures breathtakingly real. It is not just a religious scene. It's a profound psychological drama, a masterclass in linear perspective that creates a perfect illusion of three-dimensional space. The Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile is a triumph of sfumato, a technique of soft, hazy transitions between colors that he perfected by studying the way light falls in the real world. For all his genius, Leonardo was famously distractible, a perfectionist who often abandoned projects when they failed to meet his impossibly high standards. His colossal bronze horse for the Duke of Milan was never cast. Many of his paintings remained unfinished. But his legacy is not just in the art he completed, but in the questions he asked. He demonstrated that the human mind was not meant to be confined to a single discipline, but to roam freely, to observe, to question, and to create. If Leonardo was a Renaissance's restless mind, Michelangelo Buonarroti was its tormented first and foremost, who saw his work as a divine calling, to free the figures that he believed were already trapped inside the marble. When he was just 23, a heartbreakingly beautiful sculpture of the Virgin Mary cradling the dead body of Christ. The drapery, the anatomy, the raw emotion. It was so perfect that people refused to believe someone so young. In a rare fit of pride, Michelangelo snuck back into St. Peter's Basilica one night and carved his name across the sash on Mary's chest, something he later deeply regretted. His most famous work, the Statue of David, is the very definition of humanist ideals. It's not the boy king of the Bible, powerful nude figure, a symbol of human perfection and courage, poised at the moment of decision before battle. It became the symbol of the Florentine Republic, a small city-state facing down its giant rivals. But his greatest trial was not in stone, but in paint. Pope Julius II, an imposing and demanding patron, commissioned Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo protested, insisting he was a sculptor, not a painter. For 4 agonizing years, Michelangelo lay on his back on a high scaffold 60 feet above the chapel floor. Paint and plaster dripped into his eyes, and the unnatural position left him with permanent damage to his neck and back. He worked in relative isolation, fired his assistants, and argued constantly with the Pope. The result, however, was one of the supreme achievements of Western art. Over 12,000 square feet, he painted more than 300 figures, telling the story of Genesis and the creation to the flood, where the finger of God is about to impart the spark of life to humanity, is perhaps the most iconic image in art history. Michelangelo's work was a testament to the agony and ecstasy of creation, proving that transcendent beauty often requires immense suffering and unwavering, almost superhuman dedication. The Renaissance spirit of inquiry and ambition was not confined to Italy. It spilled out across Europe and onto the high seas. A new era was dawning, the age of exploration. The motivations were a potent mix, often summarized as God, gold, and glory. The fall of Constantinople had given the Ottoman Empire control over the land-based trade routes to Asia, making spices, silk, and other Eastern goods incredibly expensive. European monarchs, particularly in the newly unified and ambitious nations of Spain and Portugal, dreamed of finding a direct sea route to the Indies, bypassing the Ottomans and gaining direct access to immense wealth. This dream was made possible by new technology. The caravel, a small, fast ship with triangular lateen sails, could sail more effectively against the wind. The astrolabe and magnetic compass allowed sailors to navigate with greater accuracy. Armed with these tools and driven by ambition, explorers set sail into what they called the ocean sea. In 1492, an Italian mariner named Christopher Columbus sailed west, believing the world was smaller than it was and that he could reach Asia. He famously stumbled upon the Americas, a new world, teeming with civilizations and resources unknown to Europeans. His voyage, a navigational failure, became a world-changing success, kicking off a tidal wave of European exploration and colonization. The Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama successfully navigated around the southern tip of Africa, reaching India in 1498. He had found a coveted sea route, and in doing so, shattered the Venetian and Muslim monopoly on the spice trade, making Portugal a global superpower overnight. But this age of glorious discovery had a deeply dark side. For the millions of indigenous peoples of the Americas, Africa, and Asia, it was an age of invasion, conquest, and catastrophe. The arrival of Europeans brought not just new technologies, but new diseases. Smallpox, measles, and influenza were completely unknown in the Americas. With no immunity, native populations were wiped out in what is now called the Great Dying. In Mexico alone, the population plummeted by as much as 90% within a century of European contact. This demographic collapse made conquest easier for the Spanish conquistadors. Hernán Cortés, with a few hundred men, toppled the mighty Aztec Empire. Francisco Pizarro did the same to the sprawling Inca Empire in Peru. These conquests were not just military victories. They were a systematic plundering of wealth and the destruction of ancient cultures. To exploit the resources of this new world, particularly the vast silver mines and the lucrative sugar plantations, the Europeans needed labor. They first enslaved the native populations under a brutal system called the encomienda. When disease and abuse decimated that workforce, they turned to Africa. This began the transatlantic slave trade, one of the largest forced migrations and most horrific crimes in human history. Over 4 centuries, more than 12 million Africans were captured, branded, and packed into the suffocating, disease-ridden holds of slave ships for the torturous Middle Passage to the Americas. They were treated not as human beings, property to be bought and sold, worked to death to produce the sugar, tobacco, and cotton that fueled the economies of Europe. This brutal triangle of trade, guns and goods to Africa, enslaved people to the Americas, raw materials to Europe, laid the economic foundation for the modern Western world. The Renaissance and exploration had cracked the world open, but the next revolution would crack open the heavens themselves. The same spirit of questioning that drove Leonardo to uncover the secrets of the human body now drove a new kind of thinker to uncover the secrets of the cosmos. This was the scientific revolution. For 1,500 years, the universe was understood to the eyes of the ancient Greeks, Ptolemy and Aristotle. The Earth was the unmoving center. The sun, moon, and stars revolve around it in perfect, crystalline spheres, pushed by angels. It was a model sanctioned by the church and common sense. But to few brave thinkers, the math didn't add up. The Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus spent his life making meticulous calculations, and in 1543 published a book that proposed a radical, sun-centered, or heliocentric model of the universe. He didn't just move the Earth, he challenged humanity's central place in God's creation. The idea was so radical, it was largely ignored until the Italian astronomer Galileo Galilei built one of the first powerful telescopes and pointed it at the sky. What he saw was revolutionary. He saw that the moon was not a perfect orb, but was covered in mountains and craters. He saw 4 moons orbiting Jupiter, proving that not everything in the universe revolved around the Earth. He saw the phases of Venus, which could only be explained if it orbited the sun. Galileo published his findings not in academic Latin, but in vernacular Italian for all to read. The evidence was overwhelming, and it was a direct threat to the authority of the Catholic Church. In 1633, the Church put Galileo on trial for heresy. Old and frail, under threat of torture, he was forced to publicly recant his belief that the earth moves. He was sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. Legend claims that as he rose from his knees, he defiantly muttered, "And yet it moves." The Church could imprison the man, but not the idea. The final, definitive blow to the old universe came from the English genius, Sir Isaac Newton. In his monumental work, Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, Newton laid out his 3 laws of motion and, most importantly, his law of universal gravitation. He proposed that the same force that causes an apple to fall from a tree is the very same force that holds the moon in its orbit around the Earth, and the Earth in its orbit around the sun. It was a single, elegant, mathematical law that governed the entire cosmos. The universe was no longer a place of divine mystery, but a vast, intricate clockwork mechanism governed by predictable, discoverable laws. The scientific revolution didn't just give us a new understanding of the universe. It gave us a powerful new tool for understanding everything, the scientific method. Hypothesize. If this method could unlock the secrets of the heavens, what could it do for the human world? The next logical step was a profound one. If the universe is governed by rational, natural laws, shouldn't human society be as well? This question sparked the next great revolution, a revolution not of swords, but of ideas. This was the Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason. Thinkers across Europe began to apply the principles of logic and scientific inquiry to the traditional structures of power, government, religion, and society. They looked at the world they lived in, a world of absolute monarchs claiming to rule by divine right, of rigid social hierarchies where birth determined destiny, of brutal religious intolerance and state censorship, and they dared to imagine something better. The English philosopher John Locke argued that government was not a gift from God to the king, but a social contract between the rulers and the ruled, designed to protect the natural rights of individuals. He defined these rights as life, liberty, and property. And if a government failed to protect these rights and became a tyranny, he argued the people had not only the right, but the duty. This was a philosophical earthquake, the nerve center of the Enlightenment. Philosophers known as the philosophes gathered in the salons of Paris to debate these electrifying ideas. The brilliant and witty Voltaire championed freedom of speech and religious tolerance, attacking the hypocrisy and cruelty of the established church and state. He famously declared, "I do not agree with what you have to say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it." The Baron de Montesquieu argued for the separation of powers in government, an executive, a legislative, and a judicial branch, to prevent any one entity from becoming too powerful. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau proclaimed that sovereignty, the ultimate power to rule, rests not with a monarch, but with the people themselves. These ideas were spread through the printing press in books, pamphlets, and a massive collaborative project called the Encyclopedia, which aimed to catalog all human knowledge and make it accessible. The goal of the Enlightenment was nothing less than to build a better, more just, and more rational world. It fundamentally changed the definition of a human being, no longer a mere subject, born to serve, but a citizen, endowed with inalienable rights and the power of reason. Ideas are seeds, but they only grow when planted in fertile soil, and in the late 18th century, the soil of the Western world was ready. The philosophical debates of the salons were about to spill out into the streets, igniting an age of revolutions. The first great experiment took place in Britain's American colonies. Steeped in the writings of Locke and Montesquieu, the colonists felt their natural rights were being trampled by a distant king and parliament. They were being taxed without representation. Their trade was restricted, and their freedoms were being curtailed. In 1776, they took the ultimate leap and declared their independence. The opening lines of their declaration were a perfect summation of Enlightenment ideals. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." After a long and arduous war, they succeeded, creating a new kind of nation, a republic with a written constitution, and a government that derived its power from we, the people. But if the American Revolution was the opening act, the French Revolution was the earth-shattering main event. In 1789, France was a powder keg. The monarchy was decadent and bankrupt. The common people were crushed by taxes and starving from bread shortages, while the clergy and nobility lived in extravagant luxury, exempt from most taxes. The ideas of the Enlightenment were no longer abstract. They were a cry for justice. On July 14th, a Parisian mob, desperate for weapons and gunpowder, stormed the Bastille, a medieval fortress and royal prison that had come to symbolize the king's oppressive rule. The revolution had begun. The National Assembly issued the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, proclaiming the revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity. They dismantled the feudal system, abolished aristocratic privilege, and seized the vast wealth of the Catholic Church. And in 1793, they took the final irrevocable step. They put King Louis XVI on trial for treason and executed him before a cheering crowd with a new, efficient killing machine, the guillotine. The divine right of kings, a concept that had dominated Europe for 1,000 years, was severed along with the king's head. The French Revolution was far more radical, chaotic, and bloody than its American counterpart. It spiraled into the Reign of Terror, a period of paranoid extremism where tens of thousands were guillotined. Yet its impact was profound and global. It proved that the oldest, most powerful, and most entrenched monarchies could be utterly destroyed by their own people. The era of the citizen had arrived, born in blood and fire. While political revolutions were redrawing the map of power, another revolution, a quieter one at first, was remaking the very fabric of daily life with even greater force. It wasn't driven by philosophers or generals, but by tinkerers, inventors, and engineers. It was the industrial revolution for all of human history. Production had been limited by the power of muscle and the power of wind and water. In the late 18th century, a new, almost limitless source of power was harnessed. James Watt's perfection of the steam engine was a breakthrough that powered the new age. A steam engine could drive looms and spindles in textile mills, creating cloth at a rate unimaginable just a generation earlier. It could power bellows and iron foundries, making steel cheap and plentiful. And, most iconically, it could power the locomotive, shrinking continents, and creating a web of iron rails that connected cities and moved goods with unprecedented speed. This new factory system triggered the largest migration. Millions of people left the rural villages where their families had lived for centuries and poured into the rapidly growing industrial cities. Manchester, London, Liverpool. It was a world turned upside down. Once dictated by the rising and setting of the sun and the turn of the seasons, was now governed by the shrill blast of the factory whistle and the relentless tyranny of the clock. This new industrial world created staggering wealth in a new, powerful middle class of factory owners, bankers, and merchants. It filled homes with affordable consumer goods, but it also created a new kind of poverty and a new kind of hell. The early industrial cities were squalid, overcrowded nightmares. Working class families were crammed into poorly built tenements with no running water and no sanitation. The streets were coated in grime and the air was thick, choking smog of coal smoke. Cholera and typhoid, spread by contaminated water, swept through these slums in deadly epidemics. Inside the factories, the conditions were appalling. Men, women, and children worked 12, 14, even 16-hour days in dangerous, deafening, and mind-numbingly repetitive labor for wages that barely kept them from starvation. Children, with their small, nimble fingers, were especially valued. They worked as piecers in textile mills, repairing broken threads on massive, churning machines, and as trapper in coal mines, sitting alone in the dark for hours to open and close ventilation doors. The peasant's life had been one of backbreaking hardship, but it was tied to the land, the sky, and the community. The factory worker's life was often one of brutal anonymity, tied only to the deafening rhythm of a machine. The Industrial Revolution was the ultimate double-edged sword. It forged the modern world, with its technological marvels, its global economy, and its urban societies. But it also created profound social dislocations, a vast and impoverished working class, and beginning of the large-scale environmental degradation that we are still grappling with today. The ancient struggle for a better life hadn't ended. It had simply moved from the feudal manor to the factory floor. Our journey has taken us from a straw mattress in a medieval hut to the dawn of the modern age. We've seen humanity crawl out of the mud, reach for the heavens, and remake the world in its own image. It has been a story of almost unimaginable suffering and breathtaking genius, of brutal, soul-crushing oppression, and the unquenchable, inextinguishable thirst for freedom. It's a story of connections, a long and complex chain of cause and effect. The filth and dogma of the Middle Ages created a yearning for the beauty and reason of the Renaissance. The humanist ideals of the Renaissance fueled the curiosity of the scientific revolution. The discovery of a rational, ordered universe in the scientific revolution inspired the Enlightenment's dream of a rational, ordered society. The ideas of the Enlightenment loaded the guns of the American and French revolutions, and the scientific and technological breakthroughs of all these eras culminated in the fire and steam of the Industrial Revolution. which built the world we now inhabit. We are the inheritors of this entire, messy, glorious, and terrible story. The comfort, the technology, the rights, and the knowledge we so often take for granted are not our birthright. They are the hard-won fruits of centuries of struggle. When you vote in an election, you are walking in the footsteps of the revolutionaries in Paris and Philadelphia. When you look up a fact online, you are benefiting from the spirit of Gutenberg and the encyclopedists. When you see a doctor who uses science instead of leeches, you are living in the world Galileo and Newton helped build. The journey, of course, is not over. Our world is still rife with its own challenges: inequality, injustice, political division, and an environmental crisis that threatens our very future. But the story of our past teaches us one vital, powerful lesson: the human spirit is resilient. We possess an incredible, almost miraculous capacity to adapt, to innovate, to question, and to strive for something better. The story of humanity is a story of refusing to accept the world as it is and daring, again and again, to imagine the world as it could be. And that is a story that is still being written by all of us every single day. The journey continues.